everyone, here is how I embroidered this collar by hand. Now the materials are linked down below along with this embroidery design, along with timestamps that outline the tracing process and embroidery work for the edge work, the eyelets, the cutwork petals, the granitos, the padded button stitch petals. So to begin, I print off the embroidery file at 100% scale. I designed this for a newborn to maybe about 3 months or so, and I use this light board. It's linked down below, and I really do enjoy this. It's not so crucial when working with lightweight batistes like I'm doing now, but it does make things much easier to see nonetheless. And I'm using a friction heat activated pen to trace this design onto my fabric. I love these pens, and again, yes, they are linked down below. Once everything is traced, then the fun begins. I started by embroidering the edge of the design. To do this, I'm going ahead with the padded button stitch. To do the padding, I'm using a cotton border in size 25. If you could find a bigger size of cotton border, say 20 or so, go ahead and use that. Now this stuff is becoming harder and harder to come by. So anyhow, the whole idea of this first round is to do the padding, which is why it's ideal to grab a bigger size of cotton border or whatever fiber you are using. As you can see, I started by outlining the shape and then by filling in the shape. And with all of these stitches, you can make them as long as they will still hug the curves okay. I really should do a video going on kind of like lines within curves, but that is a subject for another time. So anyhow, the stitches can be as long as possible. The only thing you are concerned with is the outline and providing padding. So quick and dirty is just fine here. None of these stitches are going to be shown in the end. Once I did one round of padding, I kind of weaved my thread at the bottom of the curve to give it some added volume, although I don't think it made a huge difference. However, if you wanted more than one layer of padding, if you wanted more than one layer of padding in your overall shape, this is how you would do it. By weaving it through the previous layer. You don't want to send your needle down and to make actual stitches, since that'll cinch down the padding and it'll have the opposite effect that you're trying to achieve. Just an FYI. So after you get your padding done, however many layers that you desire, then you do the buttonhole stitch. To do this, I grabbed the size 30 of cotton border. This is a smaller size than the 25, and personally I think smaller the better when it comes to doing handwork. It just makes your work look more, like refined, if you will. So to tie on, I send my thread through some of those previous padding stitches on the back side of my work. This allows me to hide the tail as well as create a loop and go through that loop once to tie on. And from there, I send my needle to the front of my work starting at the bottom curve. Then I take my needle to the top curve while keeping that thread below my needle. And keeping my thread below the needle creates that little knot pearl looking thing at the end, and this makes the buttonhole stitch. Now if you decide to put your thread above the needle, that would be the satin stitch. Anywho, so I continue that same process to create the edging for this motif. Oh, and I prefer to work this without an embroidery hoop, as you can see. I just wrap the fabric around my index finger and then use my middle finger to hold it taut. I learned this positioning from the ladies of Madeira Embroidery. But if using a hoop works for you, by all means go ahead and do so. As I like to say, it is sewing, so you do you. And I tie off in the same manner when I am done with a given thread. And there you go. That's how I do the embroidery for the edge of this motif. So moving on to the eyelets. I actually have another video on a different method to do eyelets, and I will link that down below. I do like both methods, but this one is a little bit better for smaller eyelets, which is what I'm doing now. So I'm still using that cotton border size 30, and I begin by stitching around the circle. I get about 4, maybe 5 stitches in around that circle, and I'm just holding on to the tail of my thread for now. There's no knot or anything securing it. Once I stitch around the circle, what's the matter? You want to sit up here with me? Once I stitch around the circle, then I take the needle to the center and then I just pass those outline stitches. I repeat this over and over, going through that same spot in the center and then out by the outline stitches. Going through the same spot in the center is what's going to create the hole for the eyelet. Henry, you've got to be quiet, sweetie. Once I make it all the way around the circle minus that last stitch, then I send my needle through that hole for that last stitch. If you do this after making your last stitch, you'll have 2 stitches on top of each other, which will create an uneven surface and kind of lead to a sloppy looking eyelet. And to secure the end, I weave them through 2 stitches. And there you go, an eyelet. Sorry, Henry's helping. Shh, you're waking your sister. Hey, okay. Back to your playroom. Goodness. Where was I? Oh, so I weave them through 2 stitches, and that's what's going to secure, the end down. And there you go, you got yourself a little eyelet. And now one final step that you can take is to put an awl down the eyelet to kind of round off the shape and give it a little bit of a polished look. You can see the difference between doing the awl and not doing the awl. It's not a huge difference, but as they say, the devil is in the details, y'all. So then I moved on to little daisies. I did these with French knots in the center, just using 1 strand of DMC floss and 1 French knot in the center of each flower. For the petals, I did cutwork embroidery. It's the same concept as the eyelets. First, I did an outline around the shape of the petal. And same with the eyelet, I didn't do a knot or tie on. Then I carefully put my embroidery scissors through my fabric and gave it a little snip, being careful not to cut too much or go through those outline stitches. And it's a really fine line here. You kind of want to cut a little smaller than what you want the finished shape to be, since working the stitches will kind of pull on the fabric. They'll kind of pull on that fabric some, and pull it apart a little bit, so it'll get a little bit bigger than what you cut. I hope that makes some sense. So to do the stitches, it's the same idea as the eyelet. Just go around the shape. And I like to start one side. Of that point and then go up and around the shape until I get back to that point again. Then I take one final stitch over, and that kind of tightens that point and makes it defined. And then I send my needle to the wrong side of my work, and once again I go through 2 stitches, and then I clip those tails. And finally move it on to those big daisies. For the center, I worked a Granito. To do these, I took 1 strand of DMC floss and I started with my tail away from the Granito location. The whole idea of a Granito is that it starts at one point and ends at a second point, and these points stay the same the entire time you are working your Granito. So your stitches will kind of stack on top of themselves, creating a little dome, if you will. I don't think there's a rule on how many stitches to work. I think it's just personal preference. But I do have an educational video that's produced by the Madeira embroidery folks, and it does show a woman doing their signature embroidery, and she does 14 stitches. So if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me. So I'll do the first, 1 through 6 or so, just on top of themselves, kind of within 3 stitches. But then when I get to like stitch 6 or 7, I like to send 2 stitches to one side, like the next 2 stitches to one side. And then when I get to stitch 8 or 9, I like to work the next 2 stitches to the other side. And having these two side stitches helps a smooth transition from the fabric, at least I think so. It kind of rounds everything out, if you will, instead of it just going up straight. It gives it a little bit of a round shape. And then I do the last 3 or 4 stitches in the center. And I send the last stitch to the wrong side of the work. I don't send it back up again. And then I go through the underside of the Granito to tie off. And I clip the threads, and there you go, you got yourself a Granito. You can kind of see how it domes over a bit. Then I do the satin stitch using size 30 cotton embroider and an embroidery hoop. Again, you can do this without one, but I prefer to use one. So I bring my needle through the middle of my work, which is how I'm going to hide my tail. Then I start at the point of the petal, and I make 1 stitch kind of at an angle, and this angle is going to establish the angle for all the rest of the stitches. So from there, it's just a rinse and repeat until the entire petal is covered. When I approach the tail, I trim that down, and my stitches will cover it up. And then I just keep on stitching until I get to the end of the petal. Then I send my needle down through the back side of those stitches and do the loop thing again to tie off. And then I take my needle through some of the stitches, again to hide that tail. And there you go, all of the embroidery work is done. Next, I cut the collar out, and I am adding about 3/8 of an inch to those back ends. So these red marks is, the actual pattern, and I'm just adding a little bit since that's going to allow me to finish those raw edges. So now I carefully cut around the edging embroidery. Obviously you don't want to cut through any of those threads. And I gave this a rough trimming right here, and then I tidied things up when I wasn't working around a camera and wearing a little sweet baby. It is very hard, at least for me, I don't know about other people, but it's very hard for me to work around a camera when doing fine handwork. So I do my best with filming these things, and I hope that enough has conveyed through the footage. I know some of the pieces are a little bit rough, but I hope that it's clear enough for you guys to go and run with this project. So finally, I finished the raw edges of those ends by this little rolling stitch, and I have a separate video that I will link down below on how to do that. And there you go. I hope this video was helpful. If y'all have any questions, please leave them down in the comments below, and I will do my best to answer them. And as always, I appreciate y'all for watching, and I hope to catch y'all next time.